On Monday, Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt tweeted a picture of a New York State commercial driver's license his officers had seized during an enforcement action on an interstate highway. The name on this official document, found on one of 125 illegal immigrant drivers apprehended by the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, quote, no name given. New Yorkers suffered uniquely on September the 11th, 2001, but this single incident underscores how the Empire State and its government has forgotten the lessons of that horrible day, and how New York's so-called compassion for illegal immigrants is setting the United States up for a tragic replay. Here's a history lesson. All but one of the 19 hijackers who carried out the 9/11 attacks had some type of U.S. issued identification document. And as Richard Barth, then the Assistant Secretary for Policy Development at the Department of Homeland Security, told the Senate in March 2007, those terrorists found it easy to fraudulently obtain driver's licenses and state-issued identification cards. Take, for example, Hani Hanjour, who piloted American Airlines Flight 77 into the Pentagon that morning. He held identification cards from 3 different states. Those IDs, Barth contended, quote, enabled the hijackers to maneuver throughout the United States in order to plan and execute critical elements of their mission, close quote. They allowed them to rent cars, travel, take flying lessons, and yes, board airplanes. The 9/11 hijackers, Barr said, evidently believed that holding driver's licenses and ID cards would allow them to operate freely in our country. And he chillingly concluded, they were right. The bipartisan 9/11 Commission, tasked with investigating those attacks and making recommendations to assure they could never be replicated, recognized that easy access to IDs created an unacceptable vulnerability for our homeland. In their final report, the 10 commissioners advised that the federal government set stringent new standards for the issuance of driver's licenses. Quote, fraud in identification documents is no longer just a problem of theft. At many entry points to vulnerable facilities, sources of identification are the last opportunity to ensure people are who they say they are and to check whether they are terrorists, close quote. In response, Congress passed the Real ID Act of 2005, which established verification requirements states must follow in issuing driver's licenses and other IDs that can be used for federal purposes, and mandated that certain information appear on those documents. Section 202B1 of that act requires that all driver's license contain the person's full name. And yet, the driver's license the Governor Stitt tweeted out, a Real ID compliant driver's license, as is evident from the star in the upper right-hand corner, doesn't have any name at all. The name is no name given. Now, perhaps in this republic of 340 million people, there's a truck driver named no name given, but that's unlikely. More likely is the fact that a New York DMV clerk, with the consent of his or her supervisors, issued a driver's license to a person who refused to provide their real name. I know a lot about this subject because prior to September 11th, I was a terrorist prosecutor with the INS. And after September 11th, I was a congressional staffer who helped draft the Real ID Act. Worse from this perspective is the fact that this is a commercial driver's license. The September 11th hijackers not only had to have licenses and IDs, but they had to board those aircraft, overpower flight crew, and then steer massive aircraft at high rates of speed to their targets. All that a truck driver needs, however, is a license and the right cargo. There's a reason that trucks and semis on our highways have hazmat signs, danger diamonds on them to tell drivers what they contain. Flammable gas, explosives, radioactive. That's to inform those other drivers that there's dangerous cargo on hand and that they need to avoid those trucks to prevent a potential disaster. But what if a potential disaster on a massive scale is the intent of the person driving the truck itself? That's not simply a bad commute. That's a national disaster. Now, one goal of the Real ID Act was to ensure that only United States citizens and lawful immigrants had access to driver's licenses. And apparently, New York, deciding that it doesn't have to comply at all with immigration laws, has decided that it doesn't have to comply with our driver's license laws either. If that's true, the Trump administration and Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy would be well in their rights, barring any individual who carries and presents a real ID from boarding an aircraft or entering a federal building, and most of all, from entering a nuclear facility. New Yorkers suffered uniquely from September 11th, and New Yorkers, of all people, should understand why the fact that a driver's license from their state was issued in the name of no name given is such a catastrophe.